3. Mallow's Bay Fleet. Mallow's Bay is home to what some have described as the largest shipwreck fleet in the Western Hemisphere. It's located just 40 miles south of Washington, D.C., on the Maryland side of the Potomac River across from Virginia. Most of the 200 or so wrecks that litter the bay's relatively shallow waters date back to World War I, when the U.S. underwent a rapid shipbuilding program under the Woodrow Wilson administration to prepare for the country's entry into the conflict. The program began in 1917 as an effort to replace the 200 Allied merchant vessels that were being destroyed every month by German U-boats. To keep up with this urgent demand and ramp up ship production, the U.S. Shipping Board created the Emergency Fleet Corporation, which focused specifically on building ships. But the hastily built vessels were plagued by construction problems and mechanical failures, and by the time the war ended, only 98 of the 734 vessels that had been ordered were delivered, and only 76 of those ships were capable of carrying cargo. After investing $300 million in the project, the U.S. government sold the inactive and incomplete ships for scrap for just $750,000. The Alexandria, Virginia-based Western Marine and Salvage Company purchased most of the ships and relocated them to the Potomac River. They were scrapped for metal, but disposing of the wooden hulls was difficult. The hulls were eventually moved to their current location in Mallow's Bay, with plans to burn and beach them. In what remains the greatest destruction of ships at one time in American history, 31 of the hulls were burned on November 7, 1925. During the Great Depression, scrap prices plummeted, and in 1931, the company abandoned the project. By then, around 169 hulls had been moved into Mallow's Bay. In addition to containing World War I-era wrecks, the bay is home to the remains of ships spanning 3 centuries, including wrecks dating back to the Civil War. The area also contains Native American archaeological sites dating back 12,000 years. In 1942, the government-organized Metals Reserve Company contracted with the Bethlehem Steel Corporation to salvage whatever remaining scrap metal they could find in the fleet for use in the Allied World War II effort. The Ghost Fleet was largely forgotten after the war until the 1960s, when a straw company for the local electric utility provider campaigned for the removal of the hulls, with the hopes of building a nearby power generating station. But the federal government recognized that an ecosystem had developed among the fleet and ruled in a landmark decision that its destruction was unnecessary. Since then, the derelict ships have continued to serve as an important habitat for plants and animals, and an attraction for kayakers, scientists, and outdoor enthusiasts. These partially submerged vessels are home to vegetation, fish, beavers, and other mammals, birds, including bald eagles and osprey, amphibians, and even bats, who use the rotting hulls as a breeding location. In 2019, in the first decision of its kind in nearly 2 decades, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration designated the 18 square mile area a national marine sanctuary. It came on the heels of an effort that began in 2014 among public officials and conservationists who saw the site's environmental importance, as well as its tourism and educational value, and its potential to create jobs. The campaign was met with pushback from business owners who make their living along the Potomac River, and feared that the move would introduce stricter regulations that would negatively impact their operations. 5 years after hitting a discouraging standstill, the proposal was finally approved. Why do you think it took so long for something to be done to the ships of Mallow's Bay? Tell us in the comments, and hit subscribe while you're at it. 2. SS Valencia. Built in 1882, the iron-hulled passenger steamer SS Valencia originally operated between Venezuela and New York City. After being attacked by a Spanish cruiser in Guantanamo Bay in 1897, the 252-foot-long vessel began transporting passengers along the American West Coast between San Francisco and Alaska. She also served as a troop ship to the Philippines during the Spanish-American War. After the conflict, the Valencia resumed its route along the West Coast, but she wasn't very well liked among passengers, passengers who thought the second-class rated vessel was too small and felt overly exposed to the elements. She also navigated poorly during the winter and was also notoriously slow, with an average speed of just 11 knots, or 12.7 miles per hour. In addition to being inefficient and uncomfortable, the Valencia had a poor safety record starting in 1901, when her owners were fined $9,000 for carrying more passengers than their permit allowed. In 1902, the Valencia collided with another ship off Seattle and punctured her hull. An investigation found that if the vessel had been damaged below the waterline, she would have capsized and sank. 3 years later, in 1905, the Valencia ran aground at St. Michael, Alaska, with 62 crew members, 3 passengers, and 500 tons of cargo on board. Luckily, nobody was injured and the ship was able to resume its voyage with the help of a tugboat after unloading some of its cargo. At that point, the Valencia became a backup boat that was used only when needed and spent the rest of her time docked in San Francisco. She set out for what would end up being her final voyage on January 20th, 1906, with 56 crew members, 9 officers, and at least 108 passengers aboard, serving in place of another ship that was undergoing repairs at the time. Early the next morning, she encountered bad weather, forcing the crew to rely on dead reckoning instead of navigating based on the positions of celestial bodies. Consequently, the ship struck a reef in Canadian waters 11 miles off Vancouver Island, tearing a huge gash in the hull right before a large wave lifted her off the reef. All but one of the Valencia's 7 lifeboats were lowered into the water amid the confusion and panic, despite the captain's orders to the contrary. They were improperly manned, resulting in 3 flipping and spilling their occupants while being lowered, 2 that capsized, and 1 that vanished. In the meantime, massive waves continued to batter the ship, and it began to break apart. One of the few survivors, Chief Freight Clerk Frank Len, later recalled seeing terrified passengers being swept off the deck and into the water by the seemingly endless waves. Nearby ships did what they could to help, but they were essentially powerless as they watched the Valencia slip beneath the waves while passengers clung desperately to the rigging for dear life. Of the 12 men who reached the shore, 3 were washed back out and died. The 9 survivors followed a telegraph line to a lineman's cabin, where they were able to summon help. Meanwhile, the lifeboat that vanished reached land with a small group of survivors on board, and they hiked to a lifehouse, arriving in a clearly crazed and traumatized state. Altogether, only 37 people survived the sinking, all of whom were men. The exact death toll is unclear, but the number is definitely more than 100 and is thought to be at least 117. Authorities left the wreck in place, and what's left of it can still be seen to this day. An investigation blamed the wreck on poor weather and navigational errors, and the failure to save lives on a poor infrastructure and response plan along the Vancouver Island coast. Within months of the sinking, the Valencia became the topic of local rumors and ghost stories, and reported sightings of a phantom ship continued for years to come. 6 months after the disaster, the wife of a New Cha Nulth fisherman reported seeing a lifeboat containing 8 skeletons in a sea cave. It was deemed too dangerous to try recovering the bodies. Several other people made similar claims in the months following the sinking. One of the most chilling stories about the Valencia came from a handful of survivors who claimed to see a phantom ship trailing in the exhaust behind them while they were being transported to Seattle on a ship called the City of Topeka. As they watched the ghost vessel sail straight toward the rocks, just like the Valencia had, they even claimed that the ghost ship signaled to the City of Topeka. But there were no more incidents along their journey after that. The next alleged sighting came in 1910, when the Seattle Times reported that some sailors had witnessed a ship that looked like the Valencia near Pachina Point, in the same area where the Valencia sank. Like many similar reports that would come over the following years, they claimed to see waves crashing into the vessel while people clung to the rigging. The wreckage is open to visitors today, and stories of the phantom ship and sightings of skeleton-filled lifeboats continue more than a century later. 1. HMS Icy. Built in Portsmouth, England during the 1840s, The 141-foot-long HMS Eurydice was a 26-gun Royal Navy corvette that was designed to operate in shallow waters at very fast speeds. In 1877, it was converted into a seagoing ship for naval training exercises. Later that year, the ship departed for a 3-month tour through the West Indies under the command of Captain Marcus Hare. In early March 1878, following a long voyage back across the Atlantic, the Eurydice got caught in a freak snowstorm off the Isle of Wight. Onlookers recalled seeing the ship disappear from sight with its gun ports open as it capsized and sank in Sandown Bay. After realizing that nearly all hope was lost for preventing the ship from sinking, Captain Hare gave the order for every man to save himself. But he knew that most of the crew was trapped inside the ship and would never reach safety, which meant that his fate was sealed. Then, in keeping with maritime tradition and his strong Christian values, he prayed as he went down with the Eurydice. 5 men were pulled from the water after the storm, but only 2 survived. The rest of the ship's 319 crew members and trainees drowned or died from exposure during their perilous battle for survival. It was one of the most devastating peacetime naval disasters in British history. Future Prime Minister Winston Churchill witnessed the catastrophe. He was just 3 years old at the time, when his family was living along the southeast coast of the Isle of Wight in Ventnor. The wreck was refloated later that year, but it was too badly damaged to be of any use and was broken up. Its bell remains at St. Paul's Church in the Isle of Wight, which is also home to several memorials and cemeteries, including one that houses the ship's anchor. 7 crew members are buried in one cemetery, and another contains the burials of 4 crew members' bodies that washed up on shore, including 2 who were never identified. In the aftermath of the disaster, some pointed out that the Eurydice was known to be unstable due to its extreme design. Others pointed the finger at Captain Hare, who decided to sail into the storm even though 2 other ships in the area saw the dangers and appropriately avoided it. But officials ruled that the sinking was caused by the extreme weather and for no other reason, and the captain and crew were absolved of any wrongdoing. Ever since the disaster, there have been numerous reported sightings of the Eurydice sailing in the area near where it sank. According to legend, the ghost ship vanishes into the mist of the English Channel before anyone can approach it. For the most part, these sightings have been written off as superstition or people's eyes playing tricks on them. But 2 incidents were so seemingly credible that even skeptics had a hard time dismissing them. One of them happened in the 1930s, when Royal Navy submarine commander F. Lipscomb saw the Eurydice appear in front of his vessel. He rushed to avoid hitting the ship, only for it to disappear right before his eyes. While filming the Crown and Country docuseries in 1998, Prince Edward and the film crew claimed to witness a 3-masted ghost ship off the Isle of Wight. They also claimed that they captured footage of it, but the video has never surfaced. In addition to being at the center of ghost ship legends, the Eurydice is eerily linked to another maritime tragedy. After it sank, the vessel was replaced by a similar 26-gun frigate called the HMS Juno, which was renamed the HMS Atalanta by the time it set sail for Bermuda in 1878, with 280 officers and crew members aboard. Just 2 days after arriving in Bermuda in 1880, the Atalanta left for England and was never seen or heard from again. Nobody knows when or where it sank, but it's likely that the ship crossed paths with a brutal storm that blew across the Atlantic around the same time it set sail. A former crew member revealed that the vessel was overweight and claimed that he had personally witnessed it rolling to extremes during bad weather in the past. In addition to having a history of handling poorly in storms, the Atalanta's crew was young and inexperienced, making the possibility that it sank seem even more plausible. Crew members from a gunboat that passed through the area around the time of the storm reported seeing large amounts of debris in the water. And while it's probably a safe bet to assume we know what happened, the Atalanta's fate remains a mystery to this day. 3. The Wagner Group. The Wagner Group is a private military company, PMC, that's based in Russia, even though PMCs are supposedly illegal in the country. They first appeared in 2014 in Ukraine, where they aided in the annexation of Crimea. The group was also active in Ukraine's Luhansk region that same year, where they fought with Russian-backed separatists. The Wagner Group is thought to have been founded by Dmitry Valerevich Utkin, who's a veteran of the First and Second Chechen Wars. Until 2008 or 2013, Utkin served as brigade commander and lieutenant colonel of a special forces unit belonging to Russia's main intelligence directorate, which is commonly known by its former abbreviation, GRU. Upon leaving the military, Utkin started working for the Morin Security Group, which is a private company that was founded by several military veterans from Russia. Morin Security was involved in training missions and security jobs worldwide, and even specialized in security against piracy. Then, later on in 2013, the senior managers of the group were involved in setting up the Hong Kong-registered private military contractor known as the Slavonic Corps, which was responsible for headhunting contractors to protect pipelines and oil fields in Syria during the country's civil war. Utkin was then deployed there as a member of the Slavonic Corps, and luckily for him, he survived the disastrous mission. After this, though, the Federal Security Service in Russia arrested some members of the newly created private corps for participating in illegal mercenary activity. The following year, Utkin is said to have founded the Wagner Group. The group grew to prominence during Ukraine's Donbas War, which was an armed conflict that was just part of the broader Russo-Ukrainian War. The Wagner Group held pro-Russian separatist forces of the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics from between 2014 and 2015. But since then, its contractors have apparently taken part in various other conflicts around the globe, including the civil wars in Libya, the Central African Republic, CAR, Mali, and Syria. However, the group often fights on whatever side is aligned with the Russian government. Wagner operatives have been accused of war crimes in many of the areas they've been deployed in. These accusations include a long list of crimes like torturing accused deserters, robberies of civilians, and sexual assault. And because the group only operates in support of Russian interests, it often receives state-of-the-art military equipment from the country's Ministry of Defense, MOD. It also uses MOD installations for training purposes and is frequently considered to be a de facto unit of Russia's military intelligence agency, which again is typically known as GRU. It's widely speculated nowadays that the Wagner Group is utilized by the Russian government to obscure from the public the true number of casualties and the financial costs of the country's foreign interventions. It reportedly played a significant role in the invasion of Ukraine, where, among other activities, it's been deployed to take care of or assassinate certain Ukrainian leaders. The mercenary group has allegedly even recruited convicts and prisoners for frontline combat. In December 2022, John Kirby from the Pentagon claimed that the Wagner Group had a total of 50,000 fighters in Ukraine, which included 40,000 convicts and 10,000 contractors. However, others put the number of prisoners the group had recruited at over 20,000, and the overall numbers of private military companies present in the country was also estimated at 20,000. And years after denying he had any links to the group, businessman Yevgeny Prigozhin, who has close ties to Vladimir Putin, admitted in September 2022 that he may have helped create the paramilitary group. As we mentioned earlier, the Wagner Group has been accused of several war crimes in Africa and Syria. And some people are even claiming that the group is an unofficial part of Russia's military. Whether this is true or not isn't entirely clear, but the Wagner Group as a whole is shrouded in mystery, and they've basically become the Kleenex of Russian mercenaries. There seems to be multiple PMCs in the country that appear to be operating worldwide, including in Venezuela and other African hotspots, who might or might not be connected to the Wagner Group. Since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, nearly 8,000 mercenaries from the PMC have been completely decimated after being deployed by Russia to the front lines of the conflict. Executive Director of the Bellingcat investigative website, Christo Grozev, provided evidence to the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee stating that at least 3,000 members of the Wagner Group had been killed on the battlefield. According to sources within the group, which is the largest mercenary group out of the three involved in the conflict, the numbers fighting with Russian forces had been a lot higher than previously expected. A total of 200 personnel were reportedly sent to Kiev in order to scout out and assassinate certain political figures. A large number of them had been deployed with convoys that advanced from Belarus to the capital. They were apparently also present in Bucha, where there's some of the worst evidence of war crimes in existence. Christo Grozev claimed that one of the group's former members told him that he chose to fight in the conflict because they genuinely enjoyed killing. The same individual stated that about 10 to 15% of the people that join the Wagner Group are sociopaths, people who are just there to kill things. Grozev went on to explain to the Common Foreign Affairs Committee that these mercenaries aren't just adrenaline junkies, they are bloodthirsty. A professor at the U.S. National Defense University and a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, Dr. Sean McFate, also gave his 2 cents to committee members. He said that the Wagner Group's brutality in conflicts like the Syrian civil war was just part of their selling point, as far as Russia's President Vladimir Putin was concerned. Dr. McFate explained that the mercenary group was interrogating, torturing, and even beheading people in Bucha, which is the same pattern they saw in Syria. He believes that the Wagner Group has become one of Putin's weapons of choice, since it allows him some plausible deniability when it comes to failures on the ground, excesses on the ground, and policy. Regardless of this, though, Dr. McFate stated that Western countries weren't taking the threat of the mercenary group as seriously as they should be, even claiming that they hadn't even attempted to track the movements of the PMC's members. According to him, this has emboldened Russia to use this as a stratagem for national expansion, national interests. He then went on to say that these mercenaries are seen as cheap Hollywood villains who pose no real threat to the US, but he claims they're far more dangerous than that. Grozev told the committee that imposing more sanctions on Yevgeny Prigozhin, the group's alleged head, known as Putin's chef, would have very little impact overall. He instead suggested that it may be more effective to go after individual group members who like to spend time with their families abroad during the holidays. He thinks that prohibiting these individuals from traveling internationally, at least to the Western world, would be far more beneficial than slapping another sanction on Prigozhin. Do you think it's more common than most people think for men to want to join a mercenary group such as the Wagner Group in Russia? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. 2. Academy, aka Blackwater. Academy is the current name for the privately held security and training solutions provider that was previously known as Blackwater, Blackwater Worldwide, and most recently, XE. The company was initially founded back in 1997 and served both government and commercial interests across the world. It was originally founded in order to provide a training facility for regional and local law enforcement personnel. However, the organization had since expanded to offer security, risk assessment, and training solutions in both austere and stable locations all across the globe. Academy's areas of expertise range from urban assault to self-defense and VIP protection as well. According to mercenaryjobs.org, it's not all that uncommon for active-duty military members to seek out security jobs with the company. Academy has always been a private military company since it was first founded by Eric Prince and Al Clark in 1997. The training solutions provider continues to be the biggest of the United States' State Department private security contractors, and it's seen significant growth throughout the latest Iraq war. As the company expanded its operations, it was able to open its own research and development division, which has since been responsible for the development of the infantry mobility vehicle known as the Grizzly APC, as well as several other state-of-the-art military technologies. On March 2, 2009, CEO Eric Prince resigned from the company but remained a chairman of the board who's no longer involved in any of Academy's day-to-day operations. Following Prince's resignation, Joseph Yorio was named CEO and president of the company. Former CIA executive and head of the NSA, Bobby Ray Inman, was then appointed as the head of the board of directors. Then, in December 2011, the company officially changed its name from XE to Academy in order to reflect a more boring image to the public. Academy's security consulting originated from 9/11 back in 2001. At that point, it was a primary private security firm that was employed by the US government to guard installations and officials, provide coalition force support, and train the new armed forces and Iraqi police during the Iraq War. This expansion was built on the successes of the company's experience providing SEAL combat training and other support services prior to the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center in New York. The CIA subsequently requested additional contracted security forces to be hired to augment the existing force structure. And because of this, Academy, Blackwater at the time, was one of a few companies that were in a position to expand and provide the services that were required by the US government. After the war in Iraq started, the demand for additional security staff that could handle high-risk protection details expanded significantly from the State Department. And as a result, Academy obtained a serious amount of work to fill the critical need for defense, and has also seen an exemplary record for keeping principals from being killed in the field. At the moment, the company's primary public contract is from the US State Department, which operates under the Bureau of Diplomatic Security's Worldwide Personnel Protective Services, WPPS. Academy, along with DynCorp International and Triple Canopy Inc., fill the current requirements from the State Department under this contract in countries like Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Israel.
1.
The RSB, Russian Security Systems. Russian Security Systems, otherwise known as the RSB Group, is a company that implements statutory objectives in high-risk areas, specifically in high-risk military terroristic operations. The actions of the RSB's members aren't assailant but restrictive, meaning they allow for preventative actions. These specific actions are required in order to be supported by any country's military forces. The RSB was founded by a military professional after gaining extensive and rich experience during work at the Tajik-Afghan border and the Russian Border Service. The group's activities are carried out strictly according to Russian and other countries' legislation, where the company strives to protect the interests of the Russian-owned establishments. According to the Who Are We tab on the RSB's official website, rsb-group.org, it's essential that the company stays out of armed conflicts, as they claim that they won't be hired by war groups. It also states that the group doesn't provide consultations to terroristic organizations. Russian Security Systems doesn't take part in governmental overthrows or actions that will eventually lead to the violation of human rights, conventions, and international laws. The RSB Group offers a variety of services for its clients, including protection of vessels from pirates, competitive intelligence, legal support, safety and technical protection, mine clearing, and more. However, one of the biggest aims of the group is centered around client protection. Members of the RSB work together in order to eliminate threats and provide safe working conditions for their patrons. This is all based on what's written on the company's website, but the group has made headlines recently for basically doing the complete opposite of what it claims to do online. In January 2023, it was reported by a journalist working for intelligenceonline.com that RSB is now making its move into Ukraine, seemingly following the Wagner Group's lead. There are apparently several private military companies that have been tasked with locating the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and one of them just so happens to be RSB. It's unclear whether they plan to assassinate the president or not, but their involvement in the country's politics is unsettling, to say the least. Hopefully, if they do plan to take out Zelensky, they fail like the over a dozen other attempts made by mercenaries on his life since the war in Ukraine began back in late February 2022.
Four, the U.S. military is everywhere.
The U.S. military has over 750 military bases around the world as of 2021. These include many in Japan and South Korea, as well as Europe and East Asia. As with any other form of infrastructure, the facilities are expensive to keep up with, and they often contribute to poor environmental impacts in host communities. So why are there military bases all over the world? During the Cold War, the U.S. rushed to establish facilities in countries that were vulnerable to Soviet influence. Since then, America expanded their global network of bases. The reasons for this are varied. Some are economic, while others reflect the need to protect American interests in foreign countries. For example, U.S. bases in Japan, Germany, and South Korea provide support to the communities. The bases are important to America's military strategy and ensure that it has a foothold in places that would otherwise be ripe for potential threats. But many of these bases have negative impacts. These include toxic waste disposal, the dumping of hazardous materials, and environmental damage caused by military operations. In addition, bases have been shown to encourage crime and sex trafficking in certain areas. These issues negatively affect local communities and the reputation of the United States overseas. These are all important considerations when choosing to place facilities abroad. Another reason why the U.S. has international military bases is to stop other countries from engaging in hostilities. The goal is to ensure that other nations won't launch attacks against the U.S. and its allies, which could lead to war. This is a legitimate goal, but it does not justify the creation of so many facilities. The United States has a difficult time maintaining its international standing thanks to this. Perhaps they shouldn't be establishing bases everywhere. Instead of placing more around the world, the U.S. should focus on developing the technology needed to make its military capabilities safer and more effective. The country should also work to increase the economic power of the United States and its allies. This would also deter war and hostility. A large number of them are located in foreign countries. These bases serve a wide variety of purposes for the U.S., including helping a country in need with training and defense, or keeping an eye on a country that has recently defeated another nation. The purposes are varied and complex, but they all have one thing in common: to provide the United States with a geopolitical foothold overseas. This is an important strategic goal for America and a necessary part of its security strategy. This doesn't take into consideration the base's downsides. A large number of them have problems that can be damaging to both the United States and its allies. Some issues include corruption, environmental damage, and violence. Other difficulties are related to the economic burden the bases bring to the host nations. The facilities divert money away from other programs and into the military, which can have a negative effect on local economies. They can also create significant problems for American soldiers who are stationed overseas. These soldiers might have to spend extra time traveling and dealing with local issues and negative receptions. As a result, it can take them longer to get home, which causes a massive strain on family life. Also, the bases impact the political culture of the host nation and make it harder for American allies to form trust. Still, many military officials argue the facilities can help the United States keep a watchful eye on its allies and protect them from incoming threats. As it stands, the U.S. has a global military presence almost as vast as its diplomatic network. A recent study conducted by David Vine, a professor of political anthropology at the American University in Washington, D.C., and others, found that there are over 175 countries hosting U.S. military bases. What are the functions of these military bases? Training, operations, maintenance, and supply chains are overseen in these facilities. These bases can also be used to conduct other functions, like nuclear testing. For decades, proponents of the U.S. forward strategy have argued that foreign military stations provide many benefits, not just to the states, but its allies too. They claim that they can deter enemies and maintain global stability, but there is little to no factual evidence to support these claims. It's mainly just conjecture. According to David Vine, author of Base Nation: How U.S. Military Bases Abroad Harm America and the World, these bases usually do more harm than good. For example, they make it easier to wage wars abroad and encourage other nations to build their own stations, what is known as a base race. This This basically goes against the notion that they deter war. Another function of overseas U.S. bases is to ensure the continued supply of raw materials for corporations. This is an important aspect of the capitalist economic system at the heart of America's military mission. But most communities that host bases do not actually see a return on their investment in them. They're often positioned in largely impoverished rural areas, and their impact on local economies is typically only limited and temporary. Additionally, they do not create long-term jobs for locals. Those who do work on them are usually just inexperienced workers. These stations can also destroy valuable ecosystems, including habitats for wildlife and fish. Despite these environmental concerns, the US and other foreign governments continue to build bases all over the world. The military is an essential part of any modern nation's security plan, but it is not the only purpose of military stations, and it shouldn't be. The presence of facilities in African nations has been used to weaken state institutions and prevent unity and sovereignty among local citizens. It has also contributed to the fragmentation of the continent and enforced subordination of its aspirations for African consolidation. There's a growing push to cut or consolidate the bases. This is driven by both political and operational concerns, including fatigue from fighting a forever war, as well as more nuanced financial and strategic reasons. On the political side of things, there are arguments that the U.S. military stations have actually eroded American ties with foreign governments, particularly those of its allies, not helped them. In Germany, for example, the United States and its allies demilitarized the country after World War II to keep it from becoming a threat to America's interests. These original intentions have led to growing sources of tension in Germany and other European nations. This is especially true today during the current Ukraine crisis. Opposition to the presence of U.S. military bases abroad also reflects host countries' fears about risks to human security associated with large numbers of troops stationed in unfamiliar territory and the potential for instability or conflict. American soldiers typically aren't aware of social practices and customs in the nations they're sent to. This can result in miscommunications and negative stereotypes. It can also be a factor in host nation resentment and apprehension over the cost of hosting the United States. Also, to be more specific about the environmental damage the U.S. bases have caused in certain countries, contaminated groundwater and noise pollution from aircraft operating from base airfields have been notable issues. Many have claimed that the United States Department of Defense, or the DoD, fails to meet its obligations to clean up contamination at foreign bases. The country has also failed to take accountability in many cases. What is your opinion on foreign military stations? Let us know in the comments down below, and be sure to subscribe to the channel if you like the video so far. Number 3. The Diego Garcia military base in Chagos. One of the most important U.S. military stations in the world is located on Diego Garcia, a coral island in the remote Indian Ocean. Though it isn't very well known, it has played a key role in American military operations since the Cold War. It's also believed that the atoll houses a top-secret CIA prison. The base's secretive nature makes it tempting for other great power rivals, including India and China, to establish similar bases nearby. As negotiations begin for ownership of Diego Garcia, it is critical to understand the potential benefits and risks to American interests if the British government loses the islands to the Mauritius, the East African country. Mauritian sovereignty could provide a number of opportunities for the U.S. to work with the new administration, both financially and politically. In particular, a formal agreement with Mauritian officials would give the U.S. station on Diego Garcia a much firmer legal footing than it currently has with England and the British Indian Ocean Territory. Also, if Mauritius were to establish itself as the autonomous government of the Chagos, it could auction off fishing rights around the archipelago. This could create a significant income stream for the new nation while keeping Diego Garcia in good shape for the U.S. and other great powers that wish to maintain a presence in the Indian Ocean. Despite decades of homelessness, poverty, and discrimination, the Chagosians have fought for their right to return to Diego Garcia. They've been supported by Human Rights Watch in court cases in the UK, Mauritius, and the Seychelles. A recent UN ruling has backed their demand too, so it's more than likely that they'll eventually get what they've been looking for. Number 2. Thule Airbase, the northernmost U.S. military base in the Arctic. Thule Airbase in Greenland is the northernmost military base in the United States. Serving on the base is different from almost any other experience in the U.S. military thanks to its distant location. Thule serves as a strategic space command installation that supports the Defense Department's missile warning, defense, and space surveillance missions. It is a key part of U.S. strategy and symbolism in the Arctic region, which is becoming more and more important as Russia's ability to launch intercontinental ballistic missiles grows each day. The mission at Thule is challenging and requires a strong commitment from service members who work on the base to stay focused and meet their personal obligations. To help with this, the Air Force is implementing some programs to keep its service members happy and healthy while serving their time at Thule. On-base support is also being provided by the base's United Service Organization, the USO Center, which is being refurbished to provide new, comfortable furniture for active service members, will be running at full capacity by the end of 2022. The center will also be equipped with computers, TVs, video gaming stations, and reliable Wi-Fi for the soldiers to use during their downtime at Thule. Aside from the challenges of serving on this base, physical demands are also involved. Thule can be locked in by ice for about 9 months out of the year, which makes it difficult to resupply and maintain the base's facilities. The Air Force is working to improve the base's infrastructure and provide more comfort to those serving there by implementing multiple construction and power projects. The base has a long history of service as a strategic air command installation and was the hub for various military operations. For example, the installation provided a dispersal base for B-36 Peacemaker and B-47 Stratojet aircraft during the 1950s. The station also served as a testing site for the military weapon systems in the cold. Another critical component of the mission is supporting research at and near the base. The National Science Foundation leases space from the USAF at Thule to conduct research in high Arctic weather and climate conditions. The base is also home to a weather research laboratory and a research rocket firing facility. In addition to being a key part of the Space Command mission, the station provides critical training and intelligence for its airmen. The base's vantage point allows it to monitor polar orbiting satellites and detect ballistic missile launches from almost anywhere in the world. On base, airmen and their Danish and Greenlandic contractors work together to carefully watch the skies for threats and respond quickly to any concerning situation that may arise. Their jobs include training for missile warning, defense, and space surveillance missions. They also support other military activities in the region and serve as a strategic command station. Everyone at Thule has a vested interest in maintaining a high state of readiness in order to protect America's interests in the Arctic. For example, when North Korea test-launched 3 missiles recently, a U.S. Air Force team from Thule was on high alert and ready to respond within a moment's notice. 1. Riyadh Airbase. Riyadh Airbase is one of the most important United States military bases due to its strategic location in the Middle East. The base is in the capital of Saudi Arabia, giving American troops an easy way to support any possible invasions. The base is considered a safe place to travel and stay, but it also serves as a great training ground for the U.S. military. It has many training facilities and can accommodate a large number of troops, ensuring that they will be in perfect condition when necessary. Training units such as the Military Training Mission and a few parts of the U.S. MTM division are found here. There is also an armed forces hospital on the base that helps American soldiers with their injuries and medical needs. The United States Central Command Office has been looking for new ways to build partnerships in the Middle East, and officials say that they are considering a new location in Saudi Arabia where they can test weapons like missiles. They also want to increase their ability to counter potential attacks from nearby Iran. The U.S. military is still heavily involved in the Middle East, with a large number of bases scattered throughout the region, but it's getting harder to maintain them. After many years of heavy deployments, the states are looking to reduce the number of troops and assets it has on the ground. Hopefully, this is a wise decision. Thanks for watching today's video. Do you think the US does more harm than good with their overseas operations? Let us know your opinion in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more. We'll see you next time.